there will be a question and answer session later on. But until then, until you're ready to dive in and ask a question, we ask that you please mute your phones. So we're delighted to have with us today James Rogers, the Chief Communications Officer for the USCCB. And he is here to talk to us about some of the communications priorities for the U.S. bishops and also to offer suggestions from his perspective on what we can do to better communicate the message of the church as communications officials. This is part of the ongoing series offered by the Catholic Academy for Communication Professionals, an ongoing series for professional development, including webinars and podcasts. And there's also through the Catholic Press Association, I encourage people to sign up for the Catholic Media Conference, which is coming up in June in St. Louis. So with that, I've spoken enough. This is Brian Finnerty, the U.S. Communications Director for Opus Dei and Vice President of the Catholic Academy. With that, James, thank you very much for being with us.
You're very welcome, and thank you very much for the invitation and for the folks we have on the line. I really appreciate the opportunity to spend some time with you this afternoon that I hope is a dialogue and a discussion. So I have just a few broad stroke thoughts to offer that hopefully can start a conversation, and want to make sure everyone knows I am just as interested in hearing about what's working in your diocese, what's working in your organization, as I am about sharing some of the things we're doing here. So feel free to jump in at any time, and also know that hopefully 10, 15 minutes at the most of listening to me talk, and then I want to be very responsive to your questions. Feel free to also take the conversation in a direction that is most helpful to you. So what I talk about isn't meant to be exclusive of the conversation we can be having. So this is really your time as much as it is mine, so thank you. Also apologize, as I'm looking at myself here on the screen, it is a little dark. There's some shadow in the back, but not only do I have all the lights on, but my blinds don't work, so I will have to try to look into that for the future. I am going to try to share my screen now, so let me know what you see. I'm a little bit of a technological Luddite, so we'll see if we can't get this deck up. Desktop 2, great.
All right, we're seeing your slides.
Perfect. All right. The button worked. That's a great miracle. And this is just really 3 themes I want to touch today. Just a little bit about last year, where we've been, because I think it gives us a theme moving forward. I call it riding the wave because, of course, where we were in 2015 is all of the media attention around the papal visit. It really turned into an historic event, not only in traditional media, but on social media. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. And really also not as a way of saying what a great job we did, but what a great job I know so many of you online and on the phone did. We had over 200 volunteers, including Brian and many others, not only from dioceses, but Catholic organizations in the United States and Canada, who really came together and helped us make that such a great success. So it's a way of saying thank you as well today. I'm going to use that phrase probably a lot. Also, there is some good news about the lighting. When Brian said that he picked this date, I said, well, you're going to have to put up with my green jacket because it is St. Patrick's Day, but there it's muted, and that's a good thing. The next thing I want to talk about a little about, we looked at the great success and the great program of the papal visit, and for us within the conference communications office, how can we make that more of our ongoing way of doing business? And that's really our challenge for 2016. And then I'll end with a little sneak preview of where we're going from an issue perspective. The bishops in November set forth their new strategic priorities. We have more than 30 committees currently, as we speak at the conference, building plans, including communications around how we can best incorporate the 5 strategic priorities of the bishops collectively moving forward. So I just want to spend a little bit of time previewing what those priorities are, and you'll see much more in depth moving forward, especially in 2017, what happens with those. But figured I'd take this opportunity to do a little preview. So that's what we're going to be doing. Let me click down here. As I mentioned, our social media effort, this just gives you a few stats on it. In the course of 6 days, we did more than 2,400 pieces of content. We were measuring our impressions and our reach in millions. And I don't know about you, but on a daily basis, we usually measure our reach in terms of thousands, and when we're lucky, tens of thousands. So the fact that we hit millions was quite an experience for us. And especially this 5.1 billion hashtag impressions. That was about an 8% share of voice in the total visit of roughly 72 billion impressions, which meant in 2015, the papal visit, Pope Francis and all the effort that we did, that you did, created more social media interest than the Super Bowl, which in 2015 had about 68 billion online conversations taking place. And the reason I bring all that up, because I think it gives us here a lesson moving forward, is what we're really trying to do is increase not our broadcast capability in that conversation, but our engagement capability, our ability to join the conversation, to have two-way dialogue, to listen. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute, and really engage in a conversation, because overall, I do a whole separate presentation, and I know for this particular group of communicators, this is preaching to the choir, but there's been a communications revolution. From the Sermon on the Mount to the advent of television, it has all been about broadcast, how the few can broadcast to the many. And social media has really turned that on its head, and it's the many speaking to the many. So a key focus of our efforts around the papal visit were how could we amplify the message, really targeting folks who had a larger social media reach than we did. And this is what this slide is trying to say. Everyone from Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show to Shakira, we were having real-time engagement and conversation with them that they then shared with their listeners, including Stephen Colbert. Our friends in Miami helped us set up Archbishop Wensky appearing there with the hashtags. So we really had reach not only within Catholic circles, but quite deeply within secular circles as well, expanding the conversation, engaging in the conversation by first focusing on key influencers, because we can't reach everybody. We all have limited resources. So decide what you want to say and who you want to say it to help amplify your message. And that's really the whole thing I'm talking about regarding looking back at the papal visit, is that it drives, or at least what we're trying to do here at the conference in 2016, which is to say, sustain our ability to engage in the dialogue, target influencers, and really focus our effort, because we don't have 200 additional staff people, additional folks like yourself volunteering on our effort. We're much like you these days. We've gone back to our core team, our social media office, on a day-to-day basis is one person, although I'll talk in a minute about how we're trying to augment that with existing resources, because if your budget is like mine, it's not growing. So how are we trying to sustain the engagement that we had last year? And again, this is just my take on what we're trying to do here. So I don't present to you today as an expert, but purely as a notion of what we're trying to do, and then hopefully hear from you in terms of and learn from you in terms of what you're trying to do as well. So really, the first step for us is listening. If you're going to get into a conversation, I know this states the obvious, but you need to know what that conversation is about. What's the language that's being used? What's the vocabulary that's being used? Because evangelization in the digital space is very much so about enculturation. So we took a pause. We studied 12 months of online conversation taking place around the Catholic Church in the United States, around Pope Francis, to get a sense of how are they talking about it. So for those of you who may remember our, don't worry if you don't, our tagline of the papal visit, it was joyously moving people to merciful action. And we chose those words because when you do this 12-month study, those were the most common words used to describe Pope Francis. So if we can use those words in our social media outreach, it helps with the engagement. Now moving forward in 2016, right, we have a historical record of what that conversation was like. But we really think it's important to listen moving forward as well. So we've set up ongoing monitoring of what the tone of the conversation is, what words are being used, what's our share of voice in the conversation versus other conversations, so we can get a sense of the effectiveness of our message, the words we're using. The example I always point to in the papal visit was there's a tremendous, about 20% of the online conversation over the summer taking place was about divorced and remarried in the Catholic Church. Now, from a vocabulary perspective, we would not generally use the term divorce, and so we were working with our office to go through that. But if we didn't use that term, we would not be a part of that broader conversation. So we negotiated very carefully with the various offices to say, well, can we at least say civil divorce that recognizes that the church isn't saying that divorce is okay, or recognizing that it ought to be present, but that we can do it in a way that allows us to at least participate in that conversation to see if we can change a few hearts and minds, or at least let people know the authenticity of our position and where that teaching comes from. I would suggest that we don't have the type of monitoring we had during the papal visit from a resource perspective. So if you're from a small office, maybe share those resource constraints we have. There are ways to listen on a much smaller scale. So even if it's simply strolling through your Twitter feed looking for trends, take a moment to mark what the conversation might be. Things like Hootsuite or TweetDeck are very affordable, kind of run-of-the-mill software that can help you get a sense of the language that's taking place. The other thing I want to stress that's been working for us on that front is cross-functional teams. So as I said, the staff here, we have one social media person. And our lesson from the papal visit was, if you want to be a part of the conversation, if you want to pick up that sense of share of voice, you have to be engaging and talking in real time when the conversation's happening. So we've changed the way we work here, in that we're pulling, we're expecting in the next 2 weeks, for example, the apostolic exhortation to come out. Should be a lot of conversation around that. So we're building cross-functional teams. We have our social media strategist. We have our designer in the room. We have our subject matter expert from our marriage and family office, together in real time, building the content, clipping the videos, creating the memes and the images, so that we can be a part of that conversation. I think it's a critical piece, and it's a change in how we're working here. We have a long way to go, but again, how can we normalize what we were doing during the papal visit, but at a much smaller scale? And just the last note there, we're experimenting with different pieces as we do this monitoring, Periscope and Facebook Live. How can we get, for lack of a better word, low budget videos? Again, for this group, this states the obvious, but when we went back and looked at the numbers of the papal visit, wherever we had an image, a still picture, it got roughly 10 times the traffic that flat text got. But a video got 10 times the traffic that that still image had. So, and we're experiencing this again this week we've got some still images of Pope Francis up, some videos up talking about family, preparing for the apostolic exhortation, and the videos now are getting 15 times the traffic. So what are ways to get quick video if you don't have production? It's Twitter and their built-in Periscope piece. It's Facebook. So social media itself, do a quick 30-second shot right there with your smartphone. You don't need all the production. If you're old-fashioned like me, you're like, but it looks like it looks amateurish. But in today's day and age, what you really look at with social media is the notion of amateurish looks authentic. The less polished shows that you're real-time engaging in part of that in an authentic way. So we replace amateur with the term authentic voice, just to get out there. So with that, I just say, don't be afraid to experiment. And the final lesson, if you will, that we learned from the papal visit was a sense of we can't engage on every topic, right? You'll just be spread too thin. There's an old corollary in what you and I do for a living, which is if you say one thing 3 times, they might remember it, but if you say 3 things once, they're never going to remember it. So how do we focus our effort on what we're doing, because we can't be all things to all people? And so that's where we really look to align around the strategic priorities of the bishops. There was an 18-month consultation process looking at what's important to them, what's important to their people and to their flock. At the November General Assembly, these priorities went before the bishops and for approval. And now what we're doing on a day-to-day basis is to take all the lessons we've learned, what resources do we have, and really do our content planning around these 5 core areas where we're going to listen to the conversation and look for ways in particular to engage around these core areas. The first, and some of these are new and some of them aren't, is the notion of evangelization. Open wide the doors to Christ, as one bishop member of the Committee on Priorities of Plans said, that this really has to be about an invitation. It's about an invitation for all of us to deepen our own personal encounter with Christ, and then be ready to share that encounter and the fruits of it with others. So we'll be looking across our social media ways we can share stories of that encounter, just to bring it real to folks. The other is family and marriage. The notion of encourage and heal, that this is, again, invitation. With the Supreme Court decision and everything, there's a lot of attention around what the church is against today, and a real sense that we need to share far more about what we are for, that there is this invitation to holiness and to God's plan for marriage, and it really is a vocation. And that vocation, not unlike any vocation, is not perfect. And that this invitation is not to perfection, but it's to a journey toward holiness. And when we fall short, as we all do, that we need to focus on how do we heal ourselves and others in that process. Heal the wounds, as Pope Francis said several times, and was core to the materials we put together for the papal visit. Third, human life and dignity. Again, with a special concern for the vulnerable. We, of course, have always been deeply concerned about the opportunities from life, from conception to natural death. That charge that will never go away as long as the threats exist. So this is very much where we have been, of course, but also with this notion of making sure we're responding to Pope Francis and to go out to the peripheries, and that this is really about the most vulnerable and reaching out, that there's the gift of life and the opportunities available to all. And as you well know, lots of work in this area, so this will certainly be continuing. Good news, only 2 more to go, then the floor is yours. Vocations, especially with an issue of vocations and ongoing formation, that we really need to create a culture of vocations within the families and much broader. Again, you have lived this in a very real way over the months, so I don't need to spend too much time here, but just to say that it is also a continuing major focus here, and not just the beginning of vocation, but we really see through the life cycle of that vocation. So it's not just the seminary; it's 40 years out in the parish. What does vocation and accompaniment look like, and formation look like for that person? What does it look like in marriage preparation, but also at an anniversary? Big task. And finally, religious liberty, religious freedom, not just to worship, but to serve at home and around the world. We see, increasing threats. We've haven't run the final numbers on this, but it's probably not too big of a stretch to say that we are creating more martyrs today in our time than perhaps any other time in the history of the church. Congress passed a very important resolution on Monday. The Department of State made a very important declaration today on this front, and this is to say we are going to be continually committed to ensuring that people can live their faith in peace around the world, particularly the Middle East, but also there are threats here at home to those of us simply looking to serve, the folks like the Little Sisters of the Poor. Next week there's the Supreme opening of the Supreme Court arguments that says, can you serve according to your faith, or must you serve according to the way government dictates? And of course, as all of us know, faith is not simply what happens in church on Sunday morning, It should be a part of all of our lives throughout the week, and we need the freedom to live out that life, not just in private worship, but in how we live our lives. And so that'll be a major commitment of the bishops moving forward. And finally is just there to the summary. So in the highly likely event, I've said, been unclear in what I presented, please do ask clarifying questions. If there's something on your mind that I didn't raise that you wish I did, now's your opportunity. Also, if there's something you'd like to share in terms of your own experience with how your own social media programs, I would love to take a few notes and steal some good ideas as well. So thank you.
Hey, James, this is David Haynes. I'm the president of the Catholic Academy. I'd first of all really like to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today. And I have a question of my own, if it's okay to ask you one. And I'm interested in what we as communications directors can do to support what you're hoping to accomplish in the USCCB, and then how that kind of goes the other way. What you were thinking about that might be helpful to us.
Great question. I of course appreciate that mightily. I think it's two key things in terms of how you can help us. I'm a big believer in message amplification. So as you put together your own communication strategies, looking at the 5 core priorities that the bishops have identified, the more you can align to those within obviously the specific context of your organization or of your own diocese is better, is obviously appropriate. But the more that we can be amplifying your message at the national level and you amplifying our message at the regional and local level, it helps us get into the conversation more. Because again, for this group, this is clearly stating the obvious, but how people consume news is different. We don't gather around and watch the evening news anymore. If you ask young people their favorite news source, they can't tell you. They don't know the New York Times. But they are the most read generation of all time. Why? Because they just pull stuff from the cloud. And the source of that content, they don't know if it came from the Times or from Catholic News Service. That gives us an opportunity to have our message out there without the middleman of the press. But it also means we're competing with anybody in their basement who has something to say about the Catholic Church. And so the more we can be talking about similar themes, yet from our unique perspectives, it just helps amplify the message. So it's kind of, we can be around the same core priorities. 2 other quick thoughts on that. There's the very practical piece of on issues where we send out talking points and things. Authentic voice is important. So we never distribute those talking points with the idea that you simply cut and paste them, use them as is, but we really hope they're points of reflection for you to say, how can you put this in your own words and in your own ministerial context, so that we're not parroting one another, but they're obvious common themes. So it's to work with the talking points and things that we send out to really make them your own. I'm a big believer in corporate storytelling, your own examples and that type of thing. And then the third piece I would say is we need to know what's useful to you. I'll be the first to admit that here in Washington, here inside the Beltway, you hear, especially in today's political environment, the evils of the establishment. I recognize I'm a part of the church establishment. We're removed from those of you more on the front line serving the people of God directly. So we need to know what we're doing well. What are we doing now that's helping you that we can do more of? And what are we not doing well? What are we not doing that we should be doing? What are we doing that might actually be complicating your life and that we should stop doing? So I think that's important for us to have that input to calibrate here. And I'm not going to put you on the spot to say you have to have 10 things on this call, but please know you can call me, email me, and we can have those types of conversations going on. I really invite that.
Well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate hearing that point about the talking points. I know when I first started in this job, how incredibly important that was as we were in the early stages of the crisis, the sex abuse crisis. So I'm really glad to hear your commitment to that. I know that I will use those on a regular, ongoing basis. I did want to, Brian asked me to invite any and all members who have a question to please speak up and let us hear you at this point.
Just a quick housekeeping thing, James. Paul Sukup. if you could stop sharing your screen, that way we'll get to see that lovely green jacket that you're wearing.
Uh-oh. I warn you, I have a great face for radio.
Thank you.
Okay, terrific. So anyone who wants to ask questions, we welcome that. You can either jump in, or if you want to chat me, send me a message via chat, and then I'll call on you. And also, I would invite you to please say your name and affiliation as well. So questions, please. Let me just jump in. Meanwhile, while we're waiting for more questions to come in, James, could you talk a little bit more about the communication structure of the conference that has evolved somewhat, and we had Kim Daniels performing a certain role, and Helen Osmond was there, and Sister Marianne Walsh is no longer with us. Can you tell us a little bit more about your own story and what your mandate you saw as your mandate was coming in, and how you came to be helping us?
Sure. So that's a great question. In terms of our structure, we have a public affairs office, which is fundamentally the media relations operation and internal public relations counselors. We have a creative services office, which creates everything from brochures to the statements to videos to the social media memes that we do. We have Catholic News Service, as you well know, a part of the operation. We also have, for lack of a better word, an executive communications office, which supports our president, Archbishop Kurtz, on his communications needs. And we have a customer and client relations office, which is the online store that we offer. It is the digital platforms that we provide out. It's the app, the smartphone app that we have up. And I think it's fairly fair to say that each of these offices have been running relatively independently. So you use the phrase mandate. My role, what I've been asked to do, and kind of what I think about each morning when I get up, is how do we integrate these resources? Because nobody has the dollars, the money, or the time to do all that they need to do by themselves in isolation. And we certainly can't afford to be working either at cross purposes or duplicating the effort. So my role is to really look at all of these resources. How can we bring them together in cross-functional teams so that we're amplifying one another's messages? And that's really the key, because there really is no division today like there used to be. Well, media relations, we're just going to deal with print publications. No. Traditional media is social media, and vice versa. For example, I haven't done the counting here, but when I spent most of my career in healthcare. So when I came out of Kaiser Permanente, 30% of the media requests we were getting were coming from reporters via Twitter. So you have to have your social media operation right next door and working quite closely with your media relations operation. So happy to go into any more detail than that, but at the end of the day, my role is one of integrator. How can we put these pieces together and really, when do I send in the relief pitcher? Am I getting the lineup? Am I getting the batting order in the right place to put us in a position to make some contact?
A follow-up question on that. Let's say, imagine you're doing an audit of a communications office for diocese or some other major organization. You're brought to come in and take a close look at how things are running to see how they would improve. What would be some of the things that you would especially look at?
I'm very old-fashioned, as you can probably tell by the slowness with which I've been clicking buttons and interacting here on the webinar. So I believe in old-fashioned matrix planning. And so whenever I go in, there's really three questions that I think drive everything else regarding communications. The first is your message. What do you want people to do? What do you want them to know? In its simplest sense, I tend to go in and say, okay, if you could wake up tomorrow morning and see a headline in the Washington Post or the New York Times about your organization, what does that headline say? And so really, what are your 1 to 3 key core messages? So it's message. Second part is audience, right? Who are you talking to? Because you really need to tailor your message today. You know, you just stroll down in the grocery store, the toothpaste aisle. How many different types of toothpaste? You have whitening toothpaste, you have gum protection, you have tartar control, you have all dozens of different toothpaste boxes, but if you ever take a look at the ingredients, there's only 2 or 3 different varieties based on ingredients. Everything else is based on packaging and targeting because people respond differently to a different message. And the same is true for us, how we communicate the gospel. Areas where we highlight and identify resonate differently with different people. And so we really look at who we're talking to, and that gets to the learning. And the third part of the matrix is vehicle. What do you have? What tools do you have in place to reach people, right? So if you're trying to reach missionary disciples, if you're trying to reach people who are in the pews every day and are passionate, a good old-fashioned bulletin insert is probably the best way to go. That might not necessarily be true if you're looking for the seekers, the younger people who aren't there every week, but have that yearning, that hunger, that desire for something more. So I really get answers to those 3 questions, then sit down and literally build your charted matrix to say, I've got this message, I want to go to this audience, and I want this vehicle to do it, to really help micro-target. And you can also, that leads to the second step, which is gap analysis. What tools do I need that I don't have today? Just a note, I can see you may be talking, but I can't hear you.
Sorry. Okay, I just unmuted myself. You're not the only person who can sometimes be technologically challenged. But so we just received a text message from someone asking who is the Bishops' Conference consulting with in terms of improve the look and feel of their communications. Did you see that? Would you like to respond to that, or maybe the person who submitted that question, you could jump in and elaborate on that?
Sure. We're currently doing 2 key things, well, 3 key things. Obviously, it always begins with the bishops, right? We're a membership organization, and so our first line of consultation is always with the bishops, making sure we're aligned with their expectations and where we want to go. 2 other pieces that we're doing at the aggregate level, we have been doing survey research, primarily, well, not primarily, but exclusively thus far, quantitative research. We are looking to get into some qualitative research, some focus groups with key clients, but we haven't begun that quite yet. I've been on board. I've been in this particular position about 6 months. I've been with the conference for a year. But we have launched quantitative research, survey research, with folks who have registered on our website, and other key, for lack of a better word, customers. So who's interacting with our store, looking at our communications committee and who they represent, so base survey research. The third thing that we're doing, which is right now is in its infancy, that we're just getting deployed, is really our measurement and our metrics capability. So how are people using our social media? What's our tracking capability that goes a step beyond what we can all find in Google Analytics, to really track where our users, where the folks are engaging with us, what their interests tend to be, where they're going, and engaging in this broader usability testing. So I think we have a good start on the quantitative side of the consultation. Where we need to do some catch-up work is on the qualitative side, smaller group drill downs with folks like yourself, quite frankly, to augment that type of consulting we're doing with the bishops.
David, does that answer your question? Oh, okay. Could you? Okay. Yeah. Very good. Ed, yes. Okay. Maybe we'll. Maybe sometime we can get a follow-up question on that, or. Let me, David had some additional questions, but if he wants to, he can text me and I'll read it out. Or James, do you have the ability to access? Are you able to see the messages that are coming in right now?
Ah, there we go. Look at that. So I see the USB consulting using people.
See if there's anything else that you want to add, to correspond to what he asked there.
Yeah, only to agree. It is just a general comment. We live in a media environment that most likely, unless you're under the age of 24. So if you're under the age of 24 on the call, what I'm about to say does not apply to you. But if you're over 24, so if you're a digital migrant, as we say in the business, as opposed to a digital native, we are living in a communications environment that we neither trained for in school, nor that we have spent the largest majority of our career in. It's a brand new space, which means we have to pull, everyone is inventing this. I come out of a couple of Fortune 500 organizations myself. I'm a member of the Arthur Page Society, which is Fortune 500 chief communications officers getting together and coming out with the best practices as we learn and fail fast ourselves. That means people have been, as I see here, have been doing it for many years. This is the one place where a length of experience actually works against all of us. And I say that about myself as well. So we absolutely should be broadening our consultation. Obviously, what we have is tremendous institutional knowledge of the church. What we have is a deep understanding and a deep passion for the notion of sharing the good news. We've got that, but we do have to reach out beyond to pull in folks who are experimenting in this new world. So I apologize. It's a long way of saying I agree with you.
Yeah, James, this is Paul Sukup. This is kind of one of the same type of questions and maybe impossible to answer. Some years ago, our students here at Santa Clara University did a multi-year project for the Diocese of San Jose in looking at communication plans, ways to reach the youth and young adult audience, as the bishop had put it. And the students came up with a long list of, I think, some ways wonderful proposals. Many of them volunteered for the diocese for a couple of years, but ultimately the diocese just was not equipped to carry this forward, either in terms of staffing or because most of the decision makers and staff were that, digital migrant kind of category. So what advice would you have for a diocese that really does want to adopt some of these things, and short of firing everybody in the staff and hiring a bunch of 18-year-olds?
Hopefully we won't do that second path, because that would make me vulnerable as well. At the risk of being flippant, it is no more complicated than just do it. I think we digital migrants, it's a world that we don't understand, and sometimes when we don't understand, we don't trust. And even if we trust, we're afraid we're going to do it clumsily and not want to get in there. I'm very much an incrementalist. So that notion that I think is very important to say, get out there and try it. You're going to make mistakes. That's going to happen. But the only other choice is to not to participate in this tremendous conversation that's taking place. There are hundreds of thousands and millions of people talking about the church. Social media is the modern day public square. So where people traveled to the cities to preach the gospel in the public square, this is the new public square. So I think it's being incrementalist. It's about doing what you can. If you can only have a Twitter account, for example, then have that. One of the things that we're still working through now is, we've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Tumblr, all these places to be. We can't be everywhere. It can feel very overwhelming. So pick one, get out there, and see what happens.
A question on a different topic. Let's say tomorrow there's some major announcement, or Francis says something that sparks a huge amount of interest, and we're getting calls, and we'd like to make sure that we really are on the same page. What's the best way, to make sure that happens?
That's a great question. I think it begins with the notion of, back in June, As we were preparing for the papal visit, a delegation of us went over to Rome, met a number of officials over at the Vatican, and the best advice I ever got was, remember this, one does not message the Holy Father, one is messaged by the Holy Father. So the more we can amplify what he's saying, it's the least amount of risk. Now, where we know that there's going to be a big conversation, we'll prepare in advance for it. So we haven't seen the apostolic exhortation yet, for example, but we have a team lined up as soon as we do get a copy that's going to sit down, go through it, and as I've told our team, both communications people and subject matter experts, let's pick the 10 best quotes out of this to say this is what we want people to know about this exhortation. It won't be comprehensive, but it gives us a starting point. So if we know something's coming, we're doing some preparation along that front. If we don't know something that's coming, then it's a matter of, again, it gets back to that exercise of we go where the Holy Father leads. I would say, though, and I hope that this group, that you yourselves among the Catholic Academy, kind of feel this is your role, because I think it could be a helpful role for me, I'll tell you. But also, if not through the group, if you want to reach out to us individually to say, help identify what's coming. What we think might resonate at your level, what we think might resonate on the streets could be completely different than what actually does. So I would say don't hesitate to reach out and start a conversation. Everything doesn't have to begin here at the conference. It's just as important for us to get prompts to say, you might not have this issue on your radar screen, but I can tell you, my people, my parishioners, my students, whoever they may be, this is going to be a real powerful thing.
One thing I might add on that is I can say that I was very, very impressed with how responsive James was. When I remember we got some from national television outlet, was doing an interview with us, and James got back to us quite, even though it was very well into the evening, and got some suggestions. So, yes.
I see a question here from Penny. Do any plans to call communications directors together other than this webinar? Or be attending the Catholic Media Conference? Yeah, this is also a good question. It's one of the things that we're debating here. And so I would like your feedback on this very much. My default position is to try to work through what I call the regular governance of the organization. I spent 6 years with the Jesuit Conference, and so we always spoke in terms of the regular governance of the society, so that tends to be my bias. So I do look forward to engaging in things like the Catholic Media Conference. I do look forward to participating in venues such as this one. Unfortunately, I couldn't make last year's Catholic Media Conference because that was the visit to Rome for the papal visit preparations. And I use the term regular governance because I first want to see, you likely have a vibrant conversation already taking place, which if I can join and contribute to, given how busy we all are and the demands that each of you have on your time, I think that's probably a better option than if we try to set up a separate venue, a monthly call, for example, hosted by the conference that becomes competing with the other organizations that are out there. So my default position is to work through the regular structure that exists and to really engage in it, which is why I'm grateful to the invitation to be here today. If that doesn't seem sufficient, happy to look at other venues. I don't like to add meetings just to add meetings, but where it can advance the dialogue, there's no more important place for me to be spending my time. So that's where I really look to your feedback on to see if the venues are working well for everyone.
Well, Jim, I would like to basically extend an invitation for you to talk to us, the communications directors and others on the call that are part of the Academy and part of the Catholic Voice, to basically, especially I guess on these situations where there's a really quick turnaround need for information. I can see a venue like this where we can hear from you and talking points and that sort of thing directly being extremely beneficial to everybody understanding the message, getting on them and staying on them.
And let's just get down to specifics as well. Let's say tomorrow something comes out and we do want to be on the same page and we're looking for guidance. Do we call you? Do we call Don? What would you recommend there?
Yes, call me, call Don. So Don runs the public affairs office, especially if it's a media request in particular. You can touch base directly with Don, feel free. Norma Montenegro Flynn is on his staff and available. We also have an open position on the media relations staff. If you know of folks who would like to serve the church here at the conference with good media relations expert, I'll take this chance to make a plug. I'm also available, perhaps a little harder to reach sometimes given those 5 offices I oversee. I have a great breadth but very little depth, as you've probably already discovered here on this call. But my commitment is to be available as much as I can. Text, email, usually the best ways to get a hold of me. The one thing on the quick response I would say, just to highlight, in terms of an official, so we are always available to be, off the record counselors for you. You want to bounce some ideas off of us. Happy to be of service in that regard. I have folks that I do the very same thing with. I call them up and go, what do you think? We're about to do this. So I like to bounce ideas off of folks myself. When it comes to an official conference response, either 2 things have to happen. Either our president, currently Archbishop Kurtz, has to decide he wants to issue a presidential statement on a particular issue, or one of our committees, through their committee chairman, has to determine that he would like to issue a formal response. So on many issues, for example, on the Zika virus, we had discussions both at the presidential and at the committee level as to whether or not the conference wanted to issue a formal statement, formal guidance, formal talking points. For a variety of reasons I won't bore you with this afternoon, the decision was made not to do that. So there are moments where you will no doubt feel the heat and would like to have something, but for a variety of very good reasons, the process of the conference itself may have other things to consider as to why it's not officially weighing in.
One question on that. So if the conference doesn't officially weigh in on an issue like that, because I think it's a good example, is the conference able to advise communications directors unofficially, in terms of not as part of a public record and public statement of the president of the conference, but here are talking points, here are things to consider, here's a backgrounder on what was or was not allowed in Africa? I mean, because there were people on social media questioning whether or not there was actually this permission ever given for these nuns, and because we're dealing with very obscure moral issues, and I think it would be helpful to have some information on which direction we should run, what should be the main points. Again, not that the conference needs to make a declarative statement, but helping advise the communications directors through that process. Otherwise, the messages will be all over the place.
I think that's a great point. And I would say absolutely, where we are in fact in a position to have more information than you might. One of the particular examples you raised, I will say, we actually were not in a position to have more information than you had. But when we do, I do think we have an obligation to proceed as you outlined.
One other related question, something that you may or may not have inside information. You mentioned the apostolic exhortation, and any other hot button issues that you think that we should be prepared to deal with, especially, let's say, over the next year? What are the things you think are especially important that we have on our radar?
I think certainly that's going to be a big one. There is next week, the 23rd, I believe, the opening of the Supreme Court arguments around the HHS mandate with the Little Sisters of the Poor and others. That decision, when one would expect, will come in June. That is one area where we are going to be prepping talking points and background materials and things when that comes, because that's been a long-standing struggle of the bishops around the HHS mandate, and likely a conclusive ruling coming in some capacity, probably by June. So I think that'll be a key issue. I think that the exhortation will probably carry on rather than conclude a conversation. So I think as we all adjust to issues around religious liberty, while we all adjust to especially issues of marriage and the legal ramifications of that. That'll continue to be an issue. You can settle the question at the Supreme Court level of the federal position of marriage and the definition, but there are literally thousands of state and local laws that everyone is now beginning to go through to see what the impact might be. And then just I know this states the absolute obvious, but keep an eye out for yourselves during the presidential election. It's going to be a rough ride. We know that there's been some debates between the Pope himself and presidential candidates, and that's a unique position for us to be in. I think because of some of the sensational nature of the positions, we've been trying to take a more aggressive stance here than usual regarding the elections. We, of course, never talk about individual candidates. We would never endorse candidates. We do not tell you how to vote. But there are certain possibilities that clearly cross a moral line where we felt we've had to address. How do we treat religious minorities in this country, for example? What do we do about refugees? We felt the need to get a little closer to that line than perhaps we normally might. So keep an eye out. It's going to be a fun ride.
Well, James, thank you. Thank you so much. I think this has been very helpful. I think we're also, some months down the road, we'd love to try it again. And everybody else, keep posted for further webinars, for further professional development activities that we're going to be having. And so everybody, thank you very much for joining this Catholic Academy webinar.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay,
Great
thank you.
job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.